You want to be invisible as a video editor. You don't want people to think like that you just did a trick, right? Because if it's noticed that you're flashing, you're pushing, like that's just breaking focus. It's going to be a grind, and there's likely going to have to be other content. Like I don't think the podcast is in this scenario, like the holy grail, but you got to get your first pancake out there, because the first one's going to be ugly. Solving the problem, like all that blood, sweat, and tears that got you there turns into some dopamine and a little bit of passion. Like, ooh, I'm finding something.
Hi everybody, welcome back to Ship It and Sip It. This week I'm excited to have George Boyd in the studio, and he is a video editor and the owner, lead editor, creator of Cut the Pod service, which is a podcast editing service for shows just like this that want to do video podcasts and create great content. And to be honest, I've been chatting back and forth with George like on Twitter for like, I don't know, 6-7 months already. And I was afraid to have you on the show, George, because I am not a professional video editor. I am like amateur at best, but I'm trying to get better. And I decided that that fear wasn't a good enough reason not to talk to you. So welcome to the show, George. Hope to learn a lot from you today.
Happy to be here, and I'm glad that we're getting through the fear, because you know what? You don't have to be a pro to run a podcast or anything, right?
Awesome. Well, that's a great first takeaway. We're going to talk about that today and much more stuff. So first question is always, what did you ship recently that folks should check out? And I did see on Twitter that you announced that you're starting your own podcast. So maybe you want to talk about that a little bit.
That's true. Yeah. And have I shipped it yet? No, but I have announced it to the world. Yes. So let's call it a ship. And so like I do, I run a video podcast agency, we'll call it, where I try to just partner up with podcast hosts and help them make something that feels like them, that does what they need it to do. And I realized what a beautiful way to be better for my clients than to actually get in there and walk the walk and talk the talk, quite literally. So I'm going to be launching a podcast that I'm going to call the Host podcast, where I'll host nothing but podcast hosts as guests, which is going to help me learn like how they help their business, all at the same time help me learn more about my clients that I want to be helping out and help them create better podcasts. So it's a bit of a inception of a podcast, if you will.
Awesome.
It should be coming 2025. So I started some graphics and all the work this past week. So hold me accountable.
Okay, we'll look for it around New Year. And I can definitely attest to that goal, because just a little backstory on why we started Ship It and Sip It. I am a content writer for a product agency that makes apps and different web products for Paralect. And I was writing on their blog, but not being in one of their actual product teams, I didn't have a lot of like FaceTime with the people that we were working with. And so eventually we got together and brainstormed this idea, like, let's just have John talk with the founders so that John can like learn their struggles firsthand, and we also get a cool show out of it. And so
we're still one stone.
Yeah, we're still doing that thing. All right, quick roadmap for the show today. We're going to talk about your path to podcast production. And then I want to break down sort of a minimum viable podcast for busy people. And you are doing this right now, so you're a perfect person to talk to about this. Then we'll get a little bit more nitty gritty, talk about some editing tools and tricks. There's a lot of growth happening there. There's a lot of AI sort of moving into this space. Let us know what you think about that. And wrap up with storytelling and some growth ideas. So let's dive into your background a little bit. What inspired you to start working with video in general? And then we'll get into podcasts.
Yeah, so I come from like a BMX background. BMX is, doing tricks on bikes, skateboarding, but on a bike. And when you're 12 years old and you're jumping a whole foot in the air, maybe this high, there's nothing cooler than filming it and then watching it. So I took my parents' camera on a good old Hi8, I believe is what the medium was at that point, and we just filmed ourselves jumping. And that was the impetus for literally the same energy I go into it today, is like, we'll get something cool. And so we went from that, and then fast track on this is my close group of friends all ended up being amazing bike riders. One of my closest friends ended up being one of the top pros in the sport for many years. And I was the person that filmed him. So Randy would go off and he was in X Games. He was in all sorts of huge events. And I was the guy that filmed Randy. And that connection of being the filmer put me in touch with a bunch of industry people. I myself was fortunate enough to be a professional bike rider for 4 to 5 years. And it all was thanks to filming. And then my sister lived in LA. I visited her. I was like, you know what? I'm in LA. I like editing. Let's just get on Craigslist, see what we can do. Got a 1-day job on Craigslist. That 1-day job was in someone's guest bedroom in Silver Lake. And it turned into a 2-day job, 3-day job, fast forward 9-year job. So, and that guy ended up being just the most wonderful mentor ever. And he took me on a journey that led us to like working inside of Disney parks for 5-ish years. And then we worked with all sorts of other brands from that as like a launch point, like Meta, CNN, Nickelodeon, the World Health Organization, just all these awesome companies through this little agency that went from a guest bedroom to Disney Studios to leasing space to building our own building. And then the pandemic hit and I launched into my own world of handling a lot of those relationships on my own. And here we are today. That's the fast track.
Wow. So you were with that same agency from a 1-day contract for 9 years?
Yeah, literally.
That's wild.
And it almost feels funny to call it an agency because it was like my mentor and the 2 other guys we worked with were just close to my best friends for a decade.
Amazing.
It was just lightning in a bottle that just stayed there for a good, healthy chunk of time.
Amazing. I wanted to ask a little bit about sort of your decision to pivot into specifically video podcasts. So I guess talk about what the market is like for freelance or in-house video editors. It seems like, I mean, us marketers want more and more video all the time. So it seems like the demand for those roles is at an all-time high. Just tell me about that transition, why you decided to focus on video podcasts.
Yeah, well, so I was always, I came from branding, video editing, and we barely ever wanted to call ourselves video editors because we really did a good job of kind of like managing the client's library of footage and helping them understand what's possible with it. So we kind of leaned into strategy a little bit, and that position really helped whenever the pandemic hit. And a lot of producers who had to lose jobs, were bouncing around all these other random companies. We weren't able to go into the office in LA. And so, boom, I was fortunate enough to capture a lot of that work. And it kind of turned me into this generalist of working on so many different types of videos, which was really helpful. And I started building my own little small video editing agency. But I was just spread thin. I was doing so many different things. I had no specialty. And I started really kind of capturing the idea of niching down a few years ago. And I first went into e-commerce ads during the pandemic. It was just such a hot, easy topic to hit on. Then I realized I loved editing sports. I was working with the NFL for a number of years, so I dove into sports. Then I realized that the passion I have to make those types of videos is so strong that it's actually detrimental to my health. And then I just looked at the gambit of videos I'd created since the pandemic, and I looked at the ones that were the most consistent. Clients that were nice, that I enjoyed working with, that I actually feel like I was helping. And the answer was video podcast. And it really helps be creative, helps me help somebody build a business, which I've always loved to kind of play that role where you feel like a cog in someone's business. And it's predictable because people release them on a regular basis versus the email that shows up that's like, oh, that's a big job and it starts in 3 days.
Yeah.
And then you just kind of buckle down. So it helps me be kinder to myself, live a little easier bit of a life, and still leverage all the skills and relationships that I've developed over the past 12 or so years being in LA.
Cool. All right. For those of us who haven't been editing for years and years, and I count myself there, editing video can be kind of monotonous and time consuming. And I'm guessing you've experienced moments of burnouts, whether it's just due to overload or super tight deadlines or whatever it can be. What are some strategies you've learned to sort of deal with this?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. bike rides. No, but in the actual, when you're in the weeds, it's just what it is. And I think it's not for everybody. Like, I like to kind of break things up into small little chapters of problems. Like, I'm going to solve this problem, and then I'm going to check that box, and I'm going to develop in the next one. So I really love to make kind of miniature tasks for myself when I'm neck deep in a really fat, monotonous project. Kind of, there's no magic there. Like, that's what the task at hand is. But I do find that, like, having really strong systems, having like the way you work through a project, staying consistent, really helps me know where I am in it when I've made it to that next step, and kind of helps me gamify it a little bit. That's kind of my goal. I'm always trying to make something feel like I'm making progress, but video editing might as well just, it's a monotonous job and there's no sexy way around it. But once you get to that point where you're really telling stories, you're really like solving the problem, like all that blood, sweat, and tears that got you there turns into some dopamine and a little bit of passion. You're like, ooh, I'm finding something, and the puzzle's solved, and it starts to open up and unveil itself. And that feeling is what gives me the enough fuel to hop back into the next monotonous one.
Yeah, for sure. And I find the block isn't necessarily most often at the editing work itself. It's like, once I've done it all, then since I'm also the marketer for the show, I have to go out and do all the other stuff that you need to do to market the clips that you made, and sort of make thumbnails and make social media copy. And by that point, I've already worked with the materials so much, and I'm just like, I just want to give this to the world and say bye to it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there's some songs that I worked with 9 years ago that still give me PTSD. And they're like, oh no, you'll hear it in the grocery store. But the most monotonous job I ever had was, I worked at Disney parks, and they would film enormous amounts of B-roll every year, like enormous amounts. We had an 80 terabyte server that was nothing but B-roll. And when I was new there, my task was literally watching new B-roll shoots and selecting the best shots, and then making a sizzle reel out of it. And that would be like a week after week of like, okay, they're shooting Dumbo. They'd shoot the Dumbo ride with every imaginative angle possible, same people in different dresses, same people in different attire, different groups of people. And I'd film everything 8 or 9 times, and it could not be more monotonous. So maybe because I've lived in the epitome of monotony, everything now feels less less of it. But it was a wonderful muscle to strengthen over those, like, that was like a 2 or 3 year gig. So
for sure. All right, let's talk about podcasts a little bit, since you're working on one and we're on one.
We're on one, yeah.
I'm curious, now that video has become so popular in this niche of podcasting, and YouTube has played a huge role in that. So if someone wants to make video content, why should they think about it in terms of a video podcast versus just randomly publishing videos on their YouTube channel?
Yeah, like, I really like to believe that a video podcast is a bit of an engine for your YouTube. Like, it's going to keep telling YouTube, as long as your podcast is roughly staying in that realm that you exist in and work in and focus on or build your audience around, and your podcast is releasing consistent content that keeps talking about founders launching SaaS programs, like, it's going to keep you warmed up on that algorithm. It's going to keep a nice little flow of views, telling YouTube, like, hey, this is a place that talks about X, Y, or Z, SaaS founders in this example. And then when you do, if you do, release other content that's not the podcast, like, the algorithm is already warmed up and conditioned to whatever you're going to release there. So it kind of, I see it as something that greases the wheels for your brand, greases the wheels for your business, and greases the wheels for other content you're releasing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And from what I've heard from a lot of podcasters, they're pretty hard to grow, especially if you're just doing audio. Now, YouTube kind of changed this. But if you don't have a huge audience somewhere else, Instagram or X or a newsletter or something like that, it's quite hard to grow with a podcast alone. So what should new people, new podcasters have or be prepared in order to have a good launch? I guess besides just hoping that YouTube like finds your audience for you and matches, gets your content out there.
That's tough. Like if you don't have a following and you're trying to start from the ground up, it's gonna be difficult, and you just have to realize what the expectations really are. You can't say I'm gonna be at 1,000 followers in a month after I launch this. It's gonna be a grind. But if you are audio only, it's like you lose the discoverability that video opens up. And so if I was launching a podcast today on a brand new niche, brand new account, and I thought podcast is how I was going to grow it, like I would need to rely on video so that it could help me grow on all my social platforms, push these views to YouTube, and it's going to be a grind. And there's likely going to have to be other content. Like I don't think the podcast is in this scenario, like the holy grail, but it will grease the wheels to help you show these platforms you're consistent. You have a niche that you're operating in, but it's going to be a tough climb no matter what type of content you choose, and consistency is going to be the answer there. Like you just got to be consistent, stay true to what you're doing, stay on topic, and find a way to find some fun in it so that you can keep grinding, because it's going to be monotonous as growing anything will be.
Yeah, and I think this is one reason why I and many other podcasters sort of go towards the interview, because it gives us a chance to sort of, every chance we have a guest on, we kind of open that window to their audience as well. Obviously, not all guests like share it and shout it to the moon, but
right.
Just every little chance you get, because if you're just running like a solo monologue, that's a steep hill to climb.
Bless you if you are. I mean, that's going to be a steep hill, yeah. And then you don't get the network. Like one of the most beautiful things about a podcast is it gives you some platform to like talk to people you probably wouldn't talk to, and the fact that it lets them talk about themselves gives you even bit more of a access to people who you may not have normally had access to.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's talk about setups a little bit. So you can spend a lot of money on just equipment for this stuff. What advice do you have for folks who are trying to get a setup going? I feel like sort of since the pandemic, we've all sort of normalized to like whatever background, home look, it's not uncommon to not be in the studio as a podcaster. So there's a little bit more freedom, but in terms of like mics, cameras, what should people be looking at?
I think if we're starting out, right, like you don't have, I think just start out with what you got. But some things that can help is lighting. Like lighting is more important than the camera. So if you look up some like basic elements of lighting, you always want key light, which is what I've got over here. And then if you can go beyond that, you've got a backlight behind you that's going to help separate you from the background a little bit. And so those two things on their own, just getting yourself some separation from the background, lighting up your face with no big, scary Alfred Hitchcock shadows, is going to go.
How am I doing here? Is this okay?
You're good.
Awesome.
There's like a test where you hold your finger up, and if you've got like a really clear definition of your finger, you got to adjust some lighting a little bit.
Okay.
Okay. I don't see a super strong finger, so you're good. I like to like try, and I've done it myself, even just in this past year, is like, I like to say like, okay, right now I'm at phase 1, which is the MacBook or an iPhone's a huge jump up, but no lights, no mic. I'm just going to use this. We're just going to go here. And then when I go to phase 2, I'm going to get, I'm going to use my iPhone, but I'm going to get some lights.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. You probably should make the first thing a mic that you step up with. But so let's get a good mic. Then we'll save some money. Let's get some lights. Don't have to blow the bank on lights. You just need a soft light in front of you. Doesn't mean you have to have the softbox that dominates your room. Just something. And then let's, touch it into your design. Maybe you don't want the unmade bed behind you if you can avoid that. And finally, a camera. Like I'm using a really old kind of beater camera, but I've got a nice lens. Like it's always more important to have a nicer lens than a nicer camera.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got $1,000. Let's spend 20% on a camera and 80% on a nice lens. And just, don't go for the moon. Like, you just need to get a solid setup. You don't have to look like Alex Hormozy. You just need to, like, take your situation, turn some dials that don't overwhelm you so that you're looking a touch better than if you just turn the MacBook Pro webcam on.
For sure. And I think, iPhones are pretty good. I'm shooting with an iPhone now. And
they're great.
Yeah. They're coming. So this stuff is more accessible, or more people would have a decent iPhone in their pocket than they would have a decent camera to set up.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, the iPhone is almost more than enough. Like, I when I first got this lens and I didn't have good lighting, my iPhone wasn't better.
Mm-hmm. All right. So you're going through this process right now. If I wanted to start my show today, should I be building a backlog of 10 shows, or should I record one, put it out into the world, and try and start and get some feedback and see what happens after that?
It's a good question. I think I love to use the word consistent. Like, I think being consistent is so big. And I think one of the hard parts about a podcast is you do have to rely on guests. Like, if I didn't show up today, that's a problem for you. And so often guests are hard to chase down, to schedule. Then they have a life issue. Life gets in the way. So I'm a big proponent of having like 2 to 4 episodes on the back burner that are the break glass in case of emergency episodes. But you got to get your first pancake out there, because the first one's going to be ugly. So I think both ways are fine. But if it was me, I would record my first episode. I wouldn't release it. And then I would use that to build some momentum, to get my 3 or 4, get a groove. And then I'd launch the best one of those as my first. I'd keep those other 3 as my break glass in case of emergency, and then work on whatever the cadence is of episodes. If I'm doing monthly, then 3's plenty. But if I'm doing weekly, 3's not going to be enough in that safety case. So start slow and have that safety box of episodes to open up in case life gets in the way.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's really tempting for folks to look at, I don't know, the shows that are popular now, and they release pretty quickly, and they release weekly, and they talk a lot about very topical topics, because that's how the internet world works, right? And so it is very tempting to say, oh, I want to start a podcast with my friend, and I want to talk about whatever's hot this week, and we will release it on every Wednesday, and we will contribute to this internet conversation that's going on, and we'll be like on the pulse. But I think that's hard to do, especially if you're new at it, and you're not like both really dedicated to it. And if you're doing that with guests, it can fall apart really quickly. So I would say just don't fall for that temptation. Try and do more like topical shows that can, like you said, be in the back burner and be released as needed. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, the word evergreen comes to mind. It's like maybe you want to focus on like every other or every couple episodes is an evergreen episode, which just means something that's going to stand the test of time. You're not talking about what Elon Musk said last week, but instead it's something general about your niche. That's why we do this or why we do that. But that's a tough one. And if you are doing weekly or on the pulse, like, you might have to just say production's out the window. We're just going raw for the sacrifice of being on topic.
Right, for sure. All right, so let's get into editing a little bit, because this is definitely your bread and butter.
All right.
A lot of newer creators, YouTubers, or whether they're SaaS founders who want to have a podcast or just whatever role they're in, they want to DIY the production side of it. Maybe they don't have a budget. Maybe this is just a side hustle. Maybe they don't know if it'll last more than 7 episodes or whatever. There are many reasons. I edit this show myself now.
It's good for you.
For a lot of the same reasons. So do you think this is a good idea for new folks? Tell us a little bit about the learning curve for editing videos and interviews.
I think it's a really steep learning curve if you're trying to reach top tier levels, right? But if you're starting a podcast, budget's tight, you can do it yourself. You just have to turn those expectations down. And my advice would be like, be so stupid simple. Like there's going to be no tricks. You're going to keep it simple. You're not going to hit the marks and the level of production and the coolness of what you see around you. But if it's what it takes to get started, do it. Nothing hurts in just like, hey, we're on Ship It and Sip It. Like ship it and get it out there and build some momentum. But that's when budget's not there for you. If budget is there for you, like getting that off your plate is going to let you be a host who can focus on being a host. Like the fact that you're editing this, John, and you're sending out these amazing questions ahead of time. It's like, I don't know how many of you there are, but it feels like there's multiple. And so if you can offload those things, you can offload that production, the YouTube logistics, it frees you up to put time into your podcast and really think about what you want to do and how you want to do it versus the kind of survival mode, which might be that DIY stage where you're handling things yourself. But budget's a reality that not everyone can get around, right? And so there's tiers of podcast, and whatever tier is best for you at this exact moment, be happy there. Just don't reach too high if you're doing DIY. Just shoot straight, look straight, and keep blinders on and don't get distracted by shiny objects.
Yeah, that's great advice. And here's a question, I guess, a theoretical that might be hard to answer, but I just thought of it. Say there was X amount of budget that you had to put towards the show. Would you put that towards production or would you put that towards marketing?
Oh, that's a big question. That's controversial. I think they both could go right. I think me in production,
well,
I'm going to say production.
Okay.
Right? I'm going to say make it look good, rely on quality, and let that quality likely grab a hold of some organic momentum and ride that. Because whatever you're putting out into the world, if it's quality or quality doesn't necessarily always have to mean the quality is the production, right? The quality could be what you're sharing. But quality is going to do work for you wherever that quality comes in. I would be putting that into production because I'm going to look good. It's going to feel like my brand. When it does touch people, they're going to know, oh, that's Cut the Pod with George. And that's going to do some marketing work for me organically. That would not be accessible if I was, trying to DIY it and I'm using default templates on Descript that are using Alex Hormozy looking font. But I don't look like Alex Hormozy. I don't act like him, but I'm just kind of following the language of the internet. I'm not sure how it can be helpful by getting out those big numbers. But with production, I think it's the density of the views are going to help you more than the quantity of views.
Yeah. And I guess to keep going down this rabbit hole, would you spend that production budget on making a better entire episode, or would you first put it towards sort of the promotional clips and reels in post, like just to promote higher quality shorts to get people onto the full show?
That's a great question. I think it might be which shoe fits, right? Like I would probably put it into the show itself, knowing that now I've got a really strong foundation to cut from. And if I'm have a strong foundation, I can probably find a 60 to now 3 minutes, thanks to YouTube Shorts clip.
Are they 3 minutes?
That's going to resonate. They're 3 minutes now. Yeah. It's opening up all sorts of doors.
Learned something new. I read some rumors about it, but I hadn't seen if it was actually true.
It was a massive, massive thing. Yeah, for me, because they kept us locked in 60 seconds. Now we can get up to 90.
Okay.
So if you have a really strong podcast, you really leaned into the production, you look good, everyone sounds good, you can probably make a lazy 90-second cut somewhere that's going to resonate online. Whereas if you had a messy production, but you put all the money into the shorts, you're still going to end up with a good shorts because you put money in it. But I like to say, what's the top of funnel, if you will? What's our foundation? Put our money there and start from strong roots and then work your way around that.
That makes a lot of sense. All right. I assume you watch quite a few video podcasts. I actually don't. I listen to podcasts almost exclusively without video, just while I'm out walking the dog or running on the treadmill or whatever. But what do you see amateur or non-professional video editors getting wrong with their shows? And do you have any most common mistakes? And do you have any quick fixes?
Yeah, honestly, the number one thing I see the most is when you're video editing, like amateurs, and I don't mean this in a cruel way, but when you're new into something, like you get obsessed with tricks. Like, like I come from the skate park world, and like someone who's never been to the skate park is going to yell like, do a backflip when they get to the skate park. And like the do a backflip is like trying to like, oh, I see people do all these things, I'm going to try to do that. If you stay simple, you keep your, number of things you're doing to a minimal level. You say, I'm going to walk in a straight line. I'm not going to try to do the crazy zoom outs, the push ins, the figure out how to do this and figure out how to do that. Like I'm going to say, hey, I realize my skill set is capped at a 2 out of 10. Let's just keep it that as a reality. We're not going to look like everyone else. We're just going to try to not make mistakes and walk in a straight line. Because the biggest thing I see is people just trying to do too much. And I like to say, as a video editor, you've failed the moment that you've been noticed. So you want to be invisible as a video editor. You don't want people to think like that you just did a trick, right? Because if it's noticed that you're flashing, you're pushing, like that's just breaking focus. So walk in a straight line and ignore the temptation to do a trick.
All right. And then as you're sort of building the reps, you're putting out the show and you're walking this straight line, as you said. Where are the opportunities then to practice try new things? Is that just on the shorts? Like if you have some extra time, you want to sort of play around with some effects, try those transitions, try and make them decent. But, like you said, the first one's going to be rough. Shorts are really short-lived. Nobody remembers.
That's true. Right. Yeah, I would say exactly there. That's the playground.
Yeah.
Is the shorts. Like maybe you try a trick or two there, you're working, but whatever you're doing, like learn one thing at a time. Don't learn 6. Right. You want to figure out how to make a really snappy opening with the zoom out transition we always see, zoom in transition. Figure that out, get that right, and then say I did it, and then stack on top of that. Don't spread yourself thin just because there's 1,000 buttons to push.
Right.
Focus on pushing the right button, getting that dialed, and then build the next one, and then build the next one. So slow and steady.
Right on. Makes a lot of sense. Speaking of a lot of buttons to push, there are so many video editing platforms, softwares, services now. What advice do you have for someone just coming into this space? Personally, I use CapCut just because it's free and it's really simple for a beginner. What are your recommendations here?
My advice is don't get caught up in the cult-like thinking that takes place with different platforms. Like there's no teams, there's no team Premiere, there's no team Final Cut, there's no team CapCut, team Descript. Like at the end of the day, you're choosing a tool to take video clips and put them in an order. And a lot of tools can do that. And the one that you choose to do it with is the right one, so long that you stick with it. What would be more detrimental is saying, I'm going to do CapCut, and you figure out how to do it, and you get pretty good at it, and then you're like, all right, time to jump to Premiere Pro, and then you dilute a lot of what you learned. Like, yeah, there's a time to jump up there, but why do you need to do that if you're DIYing a podcast, you've got it working, you're doing enough, like, unless you've got all that time on your hands, like, it's going to be a big sacrifice to learn a new tool. So I think at the end of the day, like, if the tool can fade away into the background, it's a good tool for you. Because like, I worked with Autodesk years ago when Final Cut Pro left the professional world. It's kind of back now, but Final Cut 7 died, and there was a huge market for professional video editing now. And Autodesk, who does a lot of CAD software and 3D stuff, they sponsored and worked with my small agency of 4 people, and we were on the phone with them every week for like a year and a half. We'd go to conventions and speak on behalf of their new nonlinear editing system, and it was brutal, like, because we were focused so much on how it works. How do you do this? We knew what we wanted to do, but we didn't know how to do it because it was a new software that was breaking. And at the end of the day, they built a really lovely platform. Didn't survive, didn't make it to the market. And then we switched, for our third time in 3 years from Final Cut to Smoke to Premiere. And I just learned during that process, like they all do the same thing. So where you feel comfortable is where you should stay.
Mm-hmm. The one thing I've noticed was, I guess, some of the lighter weight ones like CapCut, it's missing a lot of the audio features and the audio side of things. And I'm not an audio expert either. I know less about audio levels and all that stuff than I know about video. So I don't really miss it. But I think if somebody is sort of conscious and like wants to bring their audio level up to a better listening experience, then that's another sort of wrinkle that you need to think about. Do you have any advice there? Do you have any plans for that?
Huge. Yeah. I mean, like, honestly, at the like beginner level, it's a hard question to answer. Descript has some decent tools that you can just run through. There's Adobe Podcast, which is an amazing tool to fix catastrophic issues. But audio is huge. And with a podcast, like you said, like you mostly listen to them on your, whatever you choose to listen to them on, but you're listening.
Yeah.
So audio is huge. And I think a decent mic will help you get in front of the fix it and post situation.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're using CapCut, get a good mic and solve that problem for the most part. But then you're going to have your guests, maybe they're eating a burger or drinking water or something, and you hear that, like, it's really important to try to get in front of that. So when someone's talking, the other person, you don't hear them sipping or whatever they're doing over there. So one person talks, one person's muted. And that's a good way to get in front of a lot of issues.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of our earlier shows were actually in person with our colleagues here.
Oh, really? Cool.
Yeah, before we really started interviewing a lot of external guests. The main idea of the show was to actually talk with, designers and developers here about what the features they designed or shipped that week. That's the name came from that as well. Cool. But you lose that sort of back and forth quickness of the conversation, obviously through the Zoom calls and things. But it is what it is. We're all used to it by now.
I know, it's amazing. I can't believe we're here because, during the pandemic, editing these things after working with like Alexa cameras and Red cameras of interviews, and then all of a sudden we're on Zoom was shocking, and now it's normal.
Yeah. Last thing I wanted to talk about in terms of editing, and we've already touched on this a little bit, is thinking about long form versus short form videos. Mm-hmm. Most people who have a podcast are going to want to make shorts. They're going to want to make reels to help promote it. And the more that I do this for the show or try to do this, the more I'm realizing that it's like two totally different things.
Mm-hmm.
Just in terms of style, in terms of, I guess, hooks and all this stuff that what makes a long form show sort of resonate and succeed on YouTube is not the same as what makes a great TikTok. Any ideas there? Have you sort of faced this struggle?
It is a struggle. That's why I always like to say, like, I try to, like, what I tell my clients is I make intentional shorts, meaning like there's a reason behind this short, but hooks are huge. It's all about the hook, because if someone doesn't watch those first 3 seconds, they don't watch the rest. So that's the name of the game when you're in the short form world, when you're fighting the doom scrollers to stop and watch you for 60 seconds. Like, that's what you're up against. That's just the reality. I like to always think I'm making 1 to 3 different types of shorts. Like, one's either just like attention, right? Like something funny happens, something big happens. We're talking about something that's controversial. Like, it's just going to be an attention grabbing thing. And then I also like to always make sure with my clients I'm building shorts that fold or dovetail into their offers, what they sell. So, if someone is going to make it through the end of this, which is, not that many people make it to the end of your shorts. It's like less than 5%, right?
Yeah.
So just realize that, like, if someone is going to make it through, what's a really nice transition and what's a really nice reality for that very unlikely person to watch the whole thing. And I think if you're selling a therapy service and you're talking about therapy and you've got someone on the hook, they watch the whole thing about therapy, and then that you have a call to action that's like, hey, check out the blah, blah, blah therapy. Here's the link, or link in bio. Like, I kind of go for those two approaches where you just realize not everyone's going to watch it. Let's get the best hook we can, and let's see what we can do for that handful of people that make it through to maybe click on something that turns them into a customer. And then the other one is just like, can we get some more views with something shocking, controversial, cool, yada, yada, human, right? So those are kind of the two ways I split them up. But be intentional and really think about those first 3 seconds.
Yeah, and speaking of getting people to the end of the short, especially as a podcaster, I think there's this like pipe dream that we repeat to ourselves about how, like, I have a podcast on YouTube. Now I'm going to make shorts. And you know how YouTube, you select like direct the viewer to some other video after the short. And you click, yes, I'm going to direct this viewer from this short back to the full episode. And everyone will flow in this wonderful stream of watching my whole show. It's like so low, the percentage of people that get to the end of the video, and even lower of those that click on that, like, watch your whole show. So I think that it makes sense. It sounds like it would work.
I think there's two things. I think, like, you just have to realize, like, we're not going to turn 100 people into watching an episode from the short. But I like to try to think, if I get someone to the YouTube channel, they've got the options to where, hey, I don't have an hour, 15 minutes to talk about this topic, but like, I like this guy, like, let's hammer through some shorts, or maybe there's 2 to 5 minute clips. Like, give them options to stick around if it's something they're interested in. And any one short can become a lead, right? They're not all going to. So it is kind of a touch of a spray and pray, but they are a tool that will help you. It's just the reality that this is not a silver bullet in any way, shape, or form. But I do think they help build awareness. They help catch the occasional person. Is it a beautiful ladder that everyone walks down the funnel and ends up at the full episode and watches it? Far from it. But does it do that on occasion? Yes. And as long as our expectations are there, it's going to help us a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And while we're here, we've talked quite a bit about YouTube, but between, I guess, the big players in short form video, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, I guess Twitter's up there too now. And, LinkedIn has vertical video now too. It's getting crazy. But is there a platform that you prefer, or I guess more effectively, is there a platform that podcasters see more like of that funnel conversion rate from?
Honestly, I feel like podcasts, you can swap out that podcast word for just content. And it's like, in my clients that I'm working with, I have some that Instagram is their mothership, I have some that YouTube is their mothership, some that Twitter X is the mothership. It's a personal strategy that can align with your brand, and they all will solve some sort of problem. But honestly, like, there's someone named Jack Appleby who's, I feel like, is one of the like strongest social media guidance or masters gurus out there, and he just like always is preaching like, it does not matter, like, find one or use them all, just do it. And don't think that if you're on Instagram, you're going to get this person. If you're on LinkedIn, you're going to get that person. Although I would probably argue LinkedIn, you are going to get a specific type of person. But I digress to say, like, you just got to do at least one really right and proper. And when you get the opportunities, or you build the muscle strong enough to move to the others, do it. But there's no one answer that is going to fit everybody. It's get a strategy, stay committed to it. Don't get distracted. Take steps forward.
Yeah, for sure. And the only thing I would add to that is, do be aware of platform risk. I mean, one of our clients
Oh,
I think last month, he got all his Instagram and Facebook accounts banned. He was running ads and videos, and I don't know what they did, but Facebook is just notoriously hard to get anything resolved in that situation. And
it's terrifying that, because I hear that story a lot. And it's really scary. I've worked for brands where that's happened, and it's scary. So yeah, I hear that the only audience you truly own is a newsletter, because you can export a CSV file of your emails and save it on your computer, and that's it.
yeah, yep. All right, let's talk a little bit more about growth and your storytelling. So
All right.
you did share some stories from not so glamorous days at Disney doing B-roll stuff. So you have worked with some amazing storytellers, including Anthony Bourdain and others. So as you edited those folks and got to work on their videos, what are some of the things that they really get right about storytelling that you see newer creators miss?
When you work with those like massive personalities, what I always found so interesting is like they themselves know what they want to look like, how they want to sound, and most importantly, like why they want to do that, and they have like a really, really strong opinion and super knowledgeable idea as to what and how they act on camera or in video form. There's machines and there's entire massive moving pieces behind them. And that knowledge as to what, how, and why is enormous, right? Like, for instance, like Anthony Bourdain's one, like you might be making a video that's holding him, and your client might be this agency that's been outsourced to you, but like, you better believe that there are guidelines and things that you need to do to make sure you stay in line to answer the call that you've been hired to do, right? When I used to make some videos that had Mickey Mouse in them, and when I would do that, I would have to like, literally, I'd do little dances and things, send them to an animator who was like an approved Mickey Mouse animator, and then I'd get the actions, and there was an entire Mickey Mouse team that would have to approve if that fit the Mickey Mouse thing. And then if it did, it got to go in the video. And it's like those types of rules and guidelines might seem from a distance like someone's being controlling, but there's like so much purpose and intention behind it. And so to get to the bottom of that, it's like purpose and intention, knowledge of who you are and how you act. That right there is gonna do so much for you if you have confidence, purpose, and intention behind the reasons and the whys you do things.
Interesting. Well, that brings up a lot of different points. Like, first of all, is the massive teams behind these operations, like the whole Mickey Mouse team. And I'm sure Anthony Bourdain's show had a huge production team. And it's quite different when, it's just me making a podcast and I have one guest every couple of weeks. So
There's not a John team behind it.
No, not yet.
Not yet.
That does set a lot of structure in terms of the way that the video comes out, in terms of like brand guidelines, how it looks, all that stuff. But do you think for more solo creators, there's a level of freedom, or do they not have sort of that confidence and that understanding of how they want to appear, that they can't quite, like, there aren't many people that can put that all together, like that freedom and that
it's a true skill.
Yeah.
And like for me, I'm figuring it out myself, right? Like I hid behind the computer for the past 12 years and now I'm in front of a camera. So it's like, I'm figuring that out too. And I don't have it figured out and I'm okay with that. But my goal is to like reach a point to where I can have one page that explains, the color that I use that represent myself, my brand, the one or two fonts that I use, and then just some like basic rules that I can lean up against. Have some pillars, 1 to 3 pillars that are like my values or what and whys are the rules behind me, would be huge. But I think there is freedom because you got to have some freedom to figure it out. You got to figure out what doesn't work, because finding out what doesn't work is just as important as what does. So use that freedom to figure out where you feel most comfortable, and then make sure you capture kind of what got you there so that you can repeat that
Yeah, that's good. That's good. It's important. It's always important to figure out what works and why. Okay, podcasts have been sort of blowing up ever since the pandemic.
Yeah.
I think it's slowed down a little bit, but I'm curious. We all know the big names in the scene, but I'm curious for you. What are some of your favorite shows that have launched not so long ago? Maybe they aren't, the Hubermans or the Joe Rogans of the world that are up and coming that you like. Maybe they're still on the amateur level. They might not be professional outfits, but that just nail it from a. Let's focus on storytelling. That nail their
Right.
storytelling, maybe at the expense of not having the best video production or other aspects of the show.
So one is shameless plug, but a client that I'm working with, Brian Meyerhofer, he is just got a great presence, and I really feel like he's got lightning in a bottle a bit. So that's a really fun one. One I just love shamelessly is Cody Schneider. I just think that what he talks about is just so awesome. It gives me FOMO every time I hear him talk. Love Greg Eisenberg's. I'm like, personally, what I consume the most is sports podcast. I'm a huge Dallas Mavericks fan. So I've always found I feel like Bill Simmons, he's not an up and comer. He's an OG. So I can't say that, but there's one I really like that was the Logan Bartlett show. Are you familiar with that?
I feel like I've heard the name, but I'm not sure I've actually watched or listened to it.
It's very cool. It's a show that has its own look and feel, and just a good one. So Logan Bartlett, and then let's see if I can think of another one. It's kind of a tough one, right? Like,
everybody has their preference.
There's so many right now, and
Yeah.
and that's kind of the fun thing with podcast is like there's 1,000 options. I personally really like Locked On Mavs, which is one that I always listen to. It's a daily podcast, believe it or not.
Oh,
So if you can imagine that, yeah.
Do you usually watch or listen to shows?
I split it. Like, truthfully, with a 3-year-old, like the only time I get in front of my computer is working hours.
Yep.
And so if I find a podcast that I know is going to absolutely help me, I will use working time to watch it. Like a recent one was Calum McDonald is his name. He interviewed the marketer behind the Stephen Barnett show. I hope I said that name right. It's the British one that's just absolutely fantastic. But he interviewed the main marketing genius behind it, and she talked about all of the strategies they use, how they have editors that are only working on shorts. They have an editor that only works on the trailer. They have an editor that only works on the long form. And that was the Calum McDonald. Donwell. I have to make sure I share that with you.
Yeah. So I'll put it in the show notes. Yeah.
There's a W in there somewhere, and I'm not sure where the W shows up. So forgive my pronunciation.
Yeah.
But that, like, if I find something that is going to give me the confidence, like this is going to make my life better, I'm going to watch it. And if it's not that, I'm in the car picking up my daughter from school or running an errand, and I'm listening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right on. Yeah, and I mostly just listen to running and cycling podcasts. I'm not into pro sports at all. So
hey, there's so many fun ones to listen to.
There are. It's wild. Yeah,
it's overwhelming.
Yeah. And I keep finding, some people, you binge on like 6 episodes and then you kind of go off it, and you realize that, yeah, there's a lot to consistency, but a lot of folks are like repeating, the same things over and over again, especially in running and cycling. There's like new science comes out all the time, but at the same time, the core ideas are pretty hashed out by now. It's not super complex. All right, let's wrap this thing up. So your new show, Host the Host, I believe, right?
The Host by Cut the Pod, yeah.
Host the Host by Cut the Pod. And are you planning to do like almost all interviews for that?
Almost exclusively, yeah. Solely working with podcast hosts. That's my goal.
Very cool.
Off the ground.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Are there let's see, are there other podcasts about podcasting that you've sort of looked at for inspiration?
Well, the inspiration came from who I just spoke about, which was, forgive me, I'm going to type his name right here. We're going to get Callum McDonald.
Mm-hmm.
Callum McDonald. He is kind of runs a podcast agency and interviewed some people behind the scenes. And I was like, what a great idea. And it was just a couple episodes of his. And so that's where I'm at. So that's the only one I've ever seen. I probably owe it to myself to do a little more market research, but at a quick glance, there's not. And truthfully, I think in this day and age, like whoever your audience is, you can do something that 9,000 other people are doing, but it's like your personality or your interest or wherever you align with these people is now the audience that you're working with. And I think it's okay if you're in a massively oversaturated market, like to go back to Dan Coe's, like you are the niche. Like at the end of the day, people are really interested in the person they're seeing or listening to. And I'm relying on that a bit, where it's like, I'm going to be me. I'm going to make sure I represent myself the way I feel like I should be. And when it resonates with someone, that'll be part of my audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One other thing I just thought of as we're talking about you launching your own show, you spent a lot of time, behind the scenes as an editor and the video maker. Has it been like challenging for you to sort of come out and present, be your own marketer, present your own brand? Do you now start a podcast? Like, what has that been like for you? And do you wish that you had done that earlier? Is there any sort of ideas?
It's really funny because when I was being a professional bike rider, like I was being interviewed, I was on shows, I was in front of cameras, I was like in magazines, and there was always a camera near me that I had to talk to or whatnot when we go on these trips. I'd go on a trip with a magazine and a filmer.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd get interviewed at the end of every day. Every year you'd get 1 or 2 interviews with magazines. And so it was like really common for me from like 18 to 25 to be in front of the camera. And now 12 years later, I lost every little bit of confidence I used to have in front of the camera. And now the camera isn't run by a professional who's good at making me feel comfortable in front of it. It's just like myself and this dang camera.
Yeah.
So it's a whole other challenge to try to solve this one. But I'm trying to tap into the kind of the past that I have. Gives me a bit of a foundation to work with, but it's tough. And like I have all these wonderful ideas that I feel like come up, and then I go to share them, and I'm battling with myself on if it feels authentic or not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The things that resonate with people, sometimes I cringe when I hit post. Sometimes when I feel the most confident, I'm like, this is the one. It doesn't resonate. And so it's a learning curve that I'm in the midst of.
Mm-hmm.
that I hope to I don't see myself as someone who's always going to be a huge personality online and out there, but I do think there's a handful of people I can resonate. And I think if I can show my people I want to work with and partner with that we have some aligned values, like that's the goal at the end of my day versus like a massive audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the internet is a weird place. Like I realized this last week. Yeah, it was last week when Hurricane Milton was coming to Florida. My parents live in Sarasota, right?
Oh, I've got family in Sarasota myself. Yeah.
So in the days before it was coming, when it was getting really strong, my sister and I were talking to them as it was growing in strength and trying to get them to leave. They were kind of resistant to leave. I don't know why. They've never been through a strong hurricane, and we have aunts and uncles in Georgia that they can go stay with. Anyway, so finally, after it got really strong, they decided to leave. And the day before, or like even like 6 or 8 hours before it hit, my sister sent the last like tracking thing, which showed it like nailing Sarasota.
Yeah.
And in a picture on our family chat. And so I copied that and I threw it on Twitter with some like, just like flippant, kind of frustrated with the hurricane. And I told my parents not to retire to Florida, but they didn't listen to me. Like just not really angry, but just like annoyed with the hurricane.
Yeah, you're concerned about it
yeah.
too. Yeah.
And no hashtags, no nothing. I don't think I even said Milton. And this got like picked up immediately by the weirdest like bot armies. And I got I don't know, I got like 6,000 views in like 10 minutes. And
yeah.
a bunch of people calling me a terrible son. Like, I mean, I deleted it after like 15 minutes. It was the weirdest thing. But like, I have a small Twitter following. It's like 750 or something. And a lot of the recent ones are bots, right? So like,
Yeah.
but when you post normal stuff and like that doesn't, I don't know what's going on there, but when you post normal stuff and you get just like regular interactions from people like you or other indie makers, and it's just like a small like community thing, that's fine. You can sort of see what grows, see who likes the show, all of that. But when you post something really topical and all these weirdos start calling you names,
Sharing your opinions.
right?
Opinions.
Yeah, I don't know. And it's the first time it's happened to me. I just made me realize that Twitter's kind of weird.
It is kind of weird. I had a similar one where I just said something that I didn't think was a strong opinion about basketball. And it was like, there was hundreds of comments, and I came back to Twitter like 3 hours later, and it was the most notifications I've ever had. I was like, all right, like, yeah, that maybe I didn't watch that game as close as you 40 people who are mad at me. So we're just going to take this down and move on. But
right.
It can get you.
All right. Let's wrap this thing up. Where should folks follow along with your journey to Cut the Pod, growing Cut the Pod, and also launching the podcast?
Yeah. So Cut the Pod is my video podcast service, and my handle on X, Twitter, whatever we want to call it today, is Cut the Pod. I've also got that same handle on Instagram. Don't have a YouTube channel that is exciting enough to follow yet, but maybe in 2 months' time, that podcast will go there. But so easy answer is there's two places: Twitter, x.com/cutthepod, and then my website, cutthepod.com. So if you can remember Cut the Pod, you're going to find me. And X is where I'm most active.
Awesome, George. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure to talk with you. I learned a lot. I hope that our viewers who are considering making or hosting a podcast also learned a lot from you today.
I hope so too. And I'm here to help people answer questions. It doesn't have to be a transactional relationship. I'm here to help if someone wants to throw some questions my way.
For sure, for sure. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend. Ship it and sip it.
Cheers.